Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next set in our series of webinars at Assessment Systems. Today I have Manny Straehle joining me to talk about his experience as a psychometrician and with some of his new interests, including a new book that he's working on. So let's start by introducing yourself, Manny, and then we'll get into some of our talks.
Yeah, I'm Manny Straehle. As Nate has indicated, I'm a fellow psychometrician, and my focus is on running my organization called Assessment Education Research Experts, where we do test development, exam development type of psychometric work with accreditation like ANSI and NCCA, and help putting standards together as well that are ISO ready. And the latest thing that we've been working on and doing a lot more of is competency modeling, which I'll get into. But I've been doing this since a long time, beginning as a clinical psychologist track on that track. So I've been doing psychometrics since those days and got a PhD in it. And so our organization's out of Miami, Florida. We have about 26, 27 different consultants. I think about 10 of them are PhDs. And so that's a little bit about us and myself.
All right. Thanks, Manny, and welcome. So let's start what you mentioned there. How did you originally get interested in measurement and psychometrics if you started as a clinical psychologist?
That's interesting, because every time I'm asked that question, a lot of psychometricians say, "Oh, I guess you were more linear," and it's like, I guess I was, in the sense that I was very interested in I think it was my sophomore year, on how do you really put clinical assessments together, and I knew two professors. One was looking at childhood anxiety, and then the other one was looking at social anxiety. And I began with Dr. Phil Kendall, who's very well known in child anxieties, on his instrument that he was developing to measure, self-report measure, where you fill in these things by hand at the time, because we didn't have surveys or anything electronic at that point on a computer or iPad or anything like that. And so my responsibility as the new person and his only undergrad student was to enter the data into a computer system by hand. And so I did a lot of that, but I was involved with all his PhD students. And then I went to Dr. Jay Efrin, who was a well-known family therapist and focused on anxieties as well. And all these two people, you could read, like if you put in their name in Google, they're really well-renowned clinical psychologists at a Temple University. And then there's a few well-known psychometricians there as well. And so that's how I got into it. And then I sort of was on a clinical psych therapeutic track. And then I ended up going to NYU, publishing there an article on ego function assessment and doing a validity, I think it's called the validity and reliability of the ego function assessment paper that was published. I forgot what journal, but it was my first journal that I published. And at the time, I didn't know I was doing psychometrics. I thought I was just doing measurement. It wasn't really, we didn't study psychometrics. We studied measurement, which is, sometimes it's just a name call there or something like that. But later on, at NYU, I found my passion in things like that, and statistics and psychometrics. But I didn't know I still wanted to pursue a clinical track. So I went back to Temple and counseling psych program. Continued less on the psychometric track, but interestingly enough, I dropped out of that program as I had a job already with NBME as a junior psychometrician. Given my stats background, they hired me, and it just that I fell in love with it further, the field, and it was just great. I worked with a lot of great people there who mentored me, and owe a lot to my profession there, and then went on to certification manager, consultant, well, more on the psychometrics at Prometric, and then did my own thing. So yeah, that was the journey I had. It was a lot more linear than most, and not recently I put together something called the Straehle Feedback Inventory, which we're going to release for free in the next few months. We had it up for a while. If you go to learnfeedback.com. It has information on it, but we developed that from scratch, and that was the latest clinical type psychometric tool that we created. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, wonderful. So did you do your PhD in psychometrics at Temple, or did you do that someplace different?
No, I did it. I switched programs. It was interesting because some of the folks at NBME were teaching there, and they encouraged us to go there. I dropped out of the counseling psych program after I wrote my first three chapters in my dissertation, and then I decided that I'm just too burned out. I can't do this. I have to find myself. And I've always had a nice background in psychometrics, and when I became a junior psychometrician essentially at NBME, that's where I fell in love with it again. And the staff there who were also mentoring me were also teaching there, so I went there to Temple in their measurement program, and did get my PhD there. So yeah, at Temple. So it was a great program. Great. It was one of the few part-time programs out there for a PhD program. So that's what made it really awesome too.
Yeah, that is unique. I occasionally get emails, especially from people outside the US, saying, where would I be able to go and either get a PhD online or part-time? It'd be like pretty much every program is full-time in person. So it's hard to be able to do that sort of work.
And I'm not sure if that's still that today. I mean, that was almost 10 years ago now. So yeah. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
So then you left Prometric and started your own thing. What
So yeah. So the next step in my career journey that I did was I left Prometric, went to work for GBCI, where I was a certification manager, and then my role was still doing psychometrics. My role was still, they added more roles to me, and then I actually became, I think my last role there was certification manager and product development manager. So I was really learning a lot about product development and the business of it, because that was another interest of mine. And then during that time, that's when Rory McCorkle and we both worked at Prometric at one point. We formed International Credentialing Associates and had that for 5 years. We were bought out, and then I started up. I didn't want to go and work for the big ship that bought us out. So I kind of liked having my own having control over the quality was really important. And when you go into the corporate world, it's a lot more difficult to have a say in that. Not that the quality is lower or better or worse. It's just that you get to control that. And I think I needed that level of control over that, and also to be a little bit innovative if I can, and also change, scale the prices down for clients that can't afford things, which is what we do often when we have clients that really can't afford us but really want to use us. We'll scale it down. We'll offer, we'll offer different pricing plans that the big groups can't offer. It's just not part of their business model.
Yeah, when they're focused on large scale clients, it's quite different. What originally inspired you to start the company on your own with Rory?
I think we were at a point where we thought we could do it, give that boutique type, and do it the way we wanted to do it, and do it in a way that we would get a lot of satisfaction out of it, and also the clients would get a lot of satisfaction. And that has been the case since I've been on my own. We have that we have that flexibility around price. We have that flexibility on what we can do. We have that flexibility in telling clients that, if you really want to meet the standards, this is what you need to do. And we have also the flexibility of walking away if we think our standards are being undermined, and that happens. It's part of business, and sometimes you're just not a fit, and that's often or not exceedingly rare, but that's often when we're not a fit for a client.
Yeah, totally agree. So what year did you found AERE?
That was 2015. We're actually going to turn 10 years old. So if anybody has any ideas on how to share the celebrations, we're trying to find like a nice way to share celebrations with our clients, so that would be really nice. I remember Sue Orchard with her company, they turned 10 years, and they had like the cupcake fair at the one of the booths at one of our industry conferences. That was really nice. So it'd be nice to do something celebratory like that, with something in their hand as well. Not just a cupcake, but it was nice to celebrate that with organizations.
Yeah, that's a great idea. What's it been like to scale and grow the company over the past 10 years?
It has been really difficult in the sense that my dream was always to get those contracts that the big guys would get, like the Pearsons, the Prometrics, the PSIs. And, there was a mentor of mine that told me, when I was trying to get those type of contracts, he would say, the big go with the big. It's just the risk management thing. So that part of it, we haven't figured out as much as we would like to. We do contract with the Fortune 100s or 10s or whatever, we have those type of contracts, but it's very difficult to get that growth that I've always dreamed of. But at the same time, the scaling has been a lot easier for me because the growth has been in a way we can control it. Like we don't have like just an outburst of growth, of maybe 40 contracts in one day. I think none of us have that, fortunately or unfortunately, but we're in a position to really take on that, given that we have 27 contractors, and we can add a lot more if we needed to, given the ring of circles that you and I live in, and the relationships we have made over the years. And we have a bigger bench of psychometricians in some of the large groups, having 10, PhD level psychometricians, and some are in IO, some are in measurement, like our field, and some are more in, I have one from clinical, so we have different types of psychometricians for different things as well, but they can do a lot of similar things. But scaling and growing has been very challenging, as you can imagine. But the growth, we're ready in terms of personnel to grow a lot larger. And scaling, we've done a really good job on really moving the clients forward and having a process for a lot of different things. We even have a lot of checklists for job analyses, item writing, those sort of things. The typical day in, day out things. The customized work's always a little bit more difficult. Like, doing research to determine eligibility requirements or recertification requirements. Those are where we bring in qualitative research as well, like focus groups and interviews, more in depth. But we do specialize in a lot of the type of job analysis type of work, which is really part of the method that we use to develop competency models.
Okay. Can you describe a little more widely, what kind of things that you primarily offer? Is it just the test development, like Angoff, item writing, job analysis, or do you expand into other types of consulting?
We primarily do that test development psychometric type of work. That's sort of 90% of what we do. We used to do a lot more customized work, but we realized that takes a lot more time to do, especially the senior folks, because a lot of times people will come to us and say, hey, we need to do something, for instance, on like, we want to know whether an evaluation of our pass rates. That is not something that we do every day. We do a standard setting to determine that, but do we come back and like look at it and determine that everything was properly done and evaluated? Or is something like, we want to know, we want to create a gamification system. We don't do that every day, so now we have to do that. Or put a performance assessment together. We do that, but not every day. Or put a rubric, or redo a rubric of observing some sort of performance or some sort of systems and things like that. We all have the experiences here, and we do that. But those things take a lot more time, and they're more costly for us because the dollar sign, a lot of groups can't afford those things, so we come down on price. So the labor is usually a lot more for us. So
Yeah, that's one of the struggles with doing consulting based business, is worrying about the labor, being able to juggle multiple projects and have the right people lined up at the right timelines.
Yeah, yeah. And we also do like accreditation consulting with internal, I do some internal audits for some organizations as well. And I'm an ANSI assessor on 17024. So I'm able to look at that in a lot more detail than some of those who don't have that experience as being an assessor. So that I enjoy a lot as well. But yeah, there's a lot of different things we do. And with the right client, when it's customized research, we usually give it a yes. Sometimes we just recommend others to do it because it just requires a lot more time than we really can. We don't know anything about that program, and maybe we're not the right fit. So, and we'll recommend others in our partner sphere.
For those listeners that aren't familiar with the whole certification side of the industry, can you explain a little bit about what ANSI and NCCA accreditation?
Yeah. So there's essentially a number of standards, but the two common ones are NCCA's, which is a certification standard, and it has requirements that you need to meet, such as did you put together a proper passing score study, and there's proper ways to do that, like everything in our field. And 17024, which is the ANSI or ANAB standard that's out there, which is an international standard. NCCA is a domestic national standard, essentially. So these are standards that organizations usually strive to maintain, obtain, and then to maintain. And they're not easy. They require a lot of changes within the organization, which I think are good changes. And I think it creates a healthy way of looking at your program. And 17024, the ANSI standard, really adapts the management system from 9001, which some of you may be familiar with that standard. That's the well-known quality management control standard, and it really could help an organization. That's where the terms corrective and preventative actions come from that world of ISO 9001. So if you're doing something wrong, you figure it out and you conduct some sort of root cause analysis and then provide corrective and preventative actions. Maybe that's more detail than the viewers want to hear, but that's one of the things I do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Time. Yeah.
And your use of the word organization there is key. So you're not just accrediting the exam, it's the organization. When I first did this, I was surprised at how many of the standards were about bylaws and financial statements and all of these other things that go around into making sure that it's a stable organization that does everything right, not just you wrote some questions and made an exam.
Yeah, what's really interesting is that the standards do, especially the ANAB standard, I think it's like 20%, 30% psychometrics, and the rest of it is programmatic, really, of the organization, how they're documenting procedures, policies, and executing them, essentially. And that's really most of it, and people are always surprised about that. But I find that interesting. We also have a standard too that divides up the program and the programmatic and the psychometrics. So you can get accredited on the psychometrics, or you can get accredited on the psychometric or program side. Yeah. So, and we're working on putting together one for continuing education or exam preparation, essentially. So that's really, I mean, that's what's really lacking exam prep standards, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, we could have a whole hour-long talk about standards and what it takes to get involved.
Yeah.
So what are some leadership lessons you've learned in growing ARE to where it is today?
I think is the relationship is really the most important thing. And that's with everybody. I learned this also from growing with ICA, that somebody that may have been your intern at ICA is now working in a large organization that now has a certification, or people switch in this field a lot. So it's important to really work on those relationships, and also, you know, have a sense of discipline to get it done, and you know, and also, you know, under promise and over deliver. That sort of line is really an important thing as well. Again, it's you know, a small organization. I represent it, you represent yours. Everybody knows us by, not by air, but by Nate or Manny. So you have to represent yourself really well and deliver everything with very good quality, whatever that is. I think marketing is probably the most difficult thing and I'm not an Elon Musk who doesn't believe in marketing. I think marketing is important, else how would anybody know my product? I'm not putting up a spaceship or creating an electrical car that has a great need. So I don't have people coming in with everybody coming in, oh, I need a psychometrician or a psychometric product. So I think, you know, balancing things as well is very difficult. You know, being able to delegate, I've gotten a lot better with that. That's an incredibly difficult leadership task, as well as, you know, your and then really focusing on the values is really important. That's really not difficult, but you have to constantly, you know what your limits are, you know, in terms of like, can you do that or not do that, you know? Can you, like, especially when I get clients that like, I love the work that you do, can you do this? And you know, I think about it and I'm like, yeah, I can do it, but I don't know if I have the capacity or the time to do it now, you know. And I don't know if they, you know, to be honest, they'd say, okay, I could do this in the next 22 months. Nobody wants to hear anything beyond 6 months or 12 months, you know. So, but there are clients that you may have for like 20 years, you know, across. I mean, that's the best part of the whole industry, is you get clients that come back for anything, and you could work with them on those timelines. And it's like, yep. So I think that's really important, you know, making sure that you deliver what you're supposed to deliver and on time. That's going to create and with high quality, that's going to create your products and services that, you know, that's so important. And that's why I think a lot of us have an affinity towards Steve Jobs, because quality was one of his drivers. Yeah, he might have been a little crazy, but quality was his thing, you know, and he knew the customer so well of what their needs were. So that was his gift.
And the company was hurt so badly those years that he wasn't at Apple. And then as soon as he came back, the whole culture changed.
Yeah. He was an incredible innovator. Yeah. And that's the thing, the grit thing is really important as leadership quality as well, you know, especially small companies. You know, you and I'll bid on something and we may not get it, but, you know, we just have to keep on going, because, you know, for us, it's between 10 and 20% that we're going to get things. For maybe Prometric, Pearson, and those guys, they'll get it at 30 to 50%, you know. So, you know, the hit rate on getting the proposal is difficult. Even you probably brought external proposal writers in too. I've done that too. So, and even with that, you know, it's just where the field is, and the risk tolerance for a small organization to have part of the process, you know. So
Yeah,
it should be different, that part of it.
and filling out some of those proposals can be a lot of work. You know, I've seen some RFPs that are pretty limited, and you can tell that whoever wrote it values your time and says, okay, I need this and this and this. Give me the resumes, explain how you're going to do this and this. But I've seen other ones that just have no concept of the time on our side, that are like, you need to give me all of your financial statements, and you need to give me your whole company org chart, and you need to do a write-up of your company history, and all these other things that aren't immediately impact, even for just the first round of selection.
Yeah, and if you do military or if you do government, it's requiring a lot more of this kind of like, why is the government requiring this? And it's very difficult for those things to change. You know, some of it's has legal basis to include it, you know, and they have to go by what the FAR, right, the acquisition sort of guidelines that they have. So it's one of those things, and you know, like it's difficult to win those, even more so. That's like a 1% chance for us, you know. And we partner with people who take those chances, or if we know the opportunity, we'll partner with them. But it's challenging. That part of it's challenging, but you have to have that grit to keep on going, because there are great clients out there, and that's been like the whole, and nothing beats working with subject matter experts. That's where my passion lies. It's like, wow, these people, they actually were like at 9/11 when when the towers collapsed, and this engineer is preventing Lower Manhattan from going into the river. Wow, this is awesome. Working with that engineer, you're before these great experts. They're seminal people in their field, and you're not as seminal as they are, but it's like wow, this is kind of cool. I'm having wine with court of master sommeliers. It's sort of cool, and I'm working on their program and making it better. So those are some unique experiences that I think that doesn't get talked about as psychometricians when you're working on a job analysis or items or whatever with these great experts. So that's the thing that I think as as leaders, we have to also come in with gratitude, or the appreciative inquiry, as my mentor was one of the founders of that copper or whatever field thing was world. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I missed that part myself, being able to work with the SMEs and learning about these different professions, because it's fascinating seeing different professions, because people like us will work with healthcare, then finance, then engineering, then who knows what. I worked with a Homeland Security organization once, and just going from one of those topics to another, it's interesting learning the topic, but then also learning how the industry is structured.
It's incredible to have that inside perspective and hang around these individuals, and you're like, and they treat you like one of them, and you become, some of them you develop a really awesome professional relationship with them, and some of them turn into friendships too. So you can't beat that, so that's priceless.
I totally agree. So let's just shift gears a little bit and talk about competency modeling, which we wanted to get to today, and your upcoming book. So first of all, can you define what competency modeling is, or even first, what is a competency?
Yeah, so those two words, to be honest, over the past, I think, since the 1970s, with a well-known researcher named McClellan, came out and talked about intelligence versus competencies. And essentially what that created was that nobody really knows what those two words really mean. And that's been the evolving case across time around competency modeling or competency researchers. Now we all put our name on it and talked about what is a competency. All those researchers have, but there hasn't been like an agreement across different disciplines on what that really means. There are about 10 major, I think, modern day competency modeling researchers out there now. Our world, how we have defined it, and interesting, writing my book, I've been redefining these terms. We define competency as somebody who has what we would call from IO psychology a KSAO, which is knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. But we also, we expand upon the other characteristics to include personality, attitudes, interests, and all that. Now that's just a competency, but when we're talking about a competency model, it's actually performing or executing or relying on some sort of one of those attributes or multiple attributes at a specific performance level. And when I talk about performance level, it goes across, something that's novice or even before novice. I don't know what that might look like, or all the way to intermediate to expert, proficient. There's all these labels out there, what performance levels they are. And we talk about a lot of that when we sit down with clients on how they would define these performance levels. But so, you're riding a bicycle, there's a novice way of steering a bicycle, there's a novice way of pedaling a bicycle, there's a novice way of braking a bicycle. That person's probably who's riding a bike, you know, like my 5-year-old was learning, is wobbling around a little, you know, maybe he did it at 4, I can't remember. But now he like is kind of like closer to an X gamer who, you know, the X gamers do all those crazy flips, I don't know, they're kind of like stunt people on bicycles, you know, so they're doing the turns, the 360s, all that sort of fun stuff, stopping, never falling down on all sorts of terrain, you know, so they're able to do it across all these conditions and all that. And then there's the in-between, which is that intermediate spectrum, but a performance level that lives on a spectrum. And that was just the bicycle example, was just to give you something that you can, that's tangible. But okay, but if you're a CEO, that's great. Why should I hire the guy who can be an X gamer, right? Is he going to take over my job? What is he going to do that's going to affect it more than an intermediate, more than a beginner? And that's where we talk about outcomes, because you know, like a job analysis would get you a specific level and specific KSAs, you know, tasks and knowledges, but it's stuck here, right? But we don't know what that is, what's the effect of that is, you know. We're just in psychometrics or measurement, we're just using a job analysis to identify the exam content essentially. But within competency modeling, we're actually adding, in our world, we're actually the outcomes. So there's really the three components, the three major components of the competency model are the KSAOs, right? That's one. We have the performance level, that's 2, and then the outcomes is 3. And these 3 things interact constantly, so it creates a dynamic, and it's always changing. So our competency model, we bring in a steering committee to monitor the competencies all the time and to adjust it, including the outcomes. So like if a CEO wanted to select someone that was, I need someone to make a lot of money as an outcome, I need someone to, you know, reduce waste, increase efficiencies, and other organizational outcomes, they would focus on maybe getting the hire that's an expert and pay a lot of money for that person. Or they may hire an intermediate, which is not going to affect the outcomes as much. But sometimes there's no difference in how they're affecting the outcomes. There's not like a 100% linear relationship between outcomes and performance levels, and it's across the specific KSA. So that's one thing, and then we bring in personality that is also interesting, and relate that to the outcomes. So now you have all these like dials, you know, that you can play with, and so that creates products and services that your competency model can offer you, diagnostics, hiring decisions, employment decisions, those sort of things, creating exams from it, creating training, education. So there's a lot of uses and benefits. I actually had a client that just looked at all the open personality assessments and decided with a group of SMEs whether they should do this or that. They didn't focus on outcomes. They didn't focus on the KSAs. They focused really just on personality, whether this person really had that, and then is that the person that they really want to hire across like grit and happiness and satisfaction and I don't know, all sorts of interesting things, resilience and persistence and those sort of factors. But there's a lot of ways to build the model. Like once you identify these 3 things, these 3 elements of a competency model, the KSAs, the performance level, and then the outcomes, then you have a really powerful way to model it all. We use different ways to model it. Some of it's at the very high level using visuals. Some of it's at the very detail level in a tabular kind of Excel spreadsheet model. Some of it needs to be done like within a technology solution, so people could focus on what part of the dial they want to spin. And that's kind of like almost like a matching sort of game that you have. You have all these attributes. Now output that person for me, so that I want. So it's very powerful. I enjoy putting them together. They're very, they take a while to do it right. Typically it's between 1.5 years to 2 years to do. You could accelerate it, but we use every single research method we have pretty much to do it, quantitative and qualitative. So interviews, focus groups, lit reviews, job descriptions, resumes, all sorts of things like that. Chat GPT, generative AI, we also generate a lot of information that way. Every group's using, I think every group's using generative AI. We are, so for a lot of things.
Yeah, us too. Yeah, my next question was going to be, how is this important from a big perspective? You started to get into it in terms of the outcomes. In some cases, like you're working with certification exams, it's improving, public protection by ensuring people are appropriately qualified to work in a position. In some cases, it's affecting an organization, like organizations hiring more qualified salespeople and their sales go up. And I've heard that nonlinear example in the past too, which is, I think, incredibly fascinating about it. Like one of the software developers I worked with years ago, who's was one of the top ones I've ever worked with, said, yeah, the experienced software developers will cost you twice as much as an inexperienced one, but they're 10 times more effective.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard the same about salespeople too. So how does competency play into those outcomes?
Yeah, so you'll have that relationship defined in the Competency model. So if someone has is at the expert performance level, you'll see the relationship in the data actually occurring. Within our Competency model, everything's self-report. So we use the survey to discuss outcomes. Like we'll say, within this task, what you need to do is that person, is that if that person's able to do that task, which is a task that's been identified as an expert level task, does that affect your revenue? So we'll ask that question. Does that affect the revenue if that person will, and by what magnitude we might ask that question on the survey. So we collect all these information around that, and then we put it all together, and you could see like the relationships within the correlations or the means of how they're answering that question, the survey takers. So and then you could also validate it by just doing observations of what the people do at work within these outcomes. We've only had that experience once because it's very expensive to go into the workplace and start evaluating these models. But typically we have people come back, the steering committee, and they say that, oh no, these models are working really well. So from what people go out there in the field and use the Competency model, like the nurses would, or the marketing folks would, or whatever expert that might be, that they'll go out and they'll use it, and they'll come back to the steering committee of the association and say, wow, this really does work really well. But the bigger thing is that it's opening their eyes to like the relationship between the tasks, or the KSAs, task knowledges and attitudes, aptitudes, whatever, and everything else, and the outcomes, revenue or efficiency or waste, whatever it might be. So that's really, really how it plays out when we're looking at the Competency model, and that's where the value comes into it.
Yeah, and how do you see this value shifting, given some of the shifts that are happening in the world today, such as going from traditional four-year universities to more of a skills-based development approach, or the shift from traditional employment where you stay in the same spot for 20 years versus the gig economy?
Like I said, this one of the things that I didn't expand upon was like the hiring decisions. I think this will start looking at like, okay, can we use diagnostics in the hiring so that people who say they have the experience and maybe not have a formal education or training, they can skip that step and go right to diagnostics, or there's a training component that an organization can use that specializes just in, I don't know, psychometrics, let's say, and they don't have to go through a PhD program. They can just become, or a master's program. They can just do it right out of undergrad with the proper training and things like that. So, but they have model of, well, okay, this is what I need to become a beginner psych. This is what I need to, or what I need to know and do to become a intermediate and expert, or these are the things that like the organization that I'm seeking to work for are really interested in terms of outcomes, so, and the outcomes really is not anything novel. It's really predictive validity at the end of the day, so, but just defining the outcomes might be more, the outcomes might be more novel in that case, but it's not completely novel in that sense of it,
Yeah, so interesting. So you mentioned that you were writing a book on this. What's the status of that book? Can we expect it, and how would somebody get a hold of it? And what kind of role is that book filling in the credentialing world?
Yeah, so I'm about halfway through the book. It's been all outlined, and the book really also gets into the strategy, the strategic elements of what you need to do to really execute a competency model. Some of those things are just like understanding why you're doing it, and what you want it to do at the end of the day, in terms of that. And there's like little pieces to fill in, like they're kind of like a really good value proposition in marketing, in terms of, who your target audience is, what are your psychographics, what are your sociographics, those sort of things you get into. And the book gets into that level of detail as well, and gets into like how you do it, gets into the history of competency modeling, gets into the definitions, the various elements of competency modeling, like the outcomes we talked about today, and the uses, and how you represent a competency model, like visually, tabular. There's several ways to look at that. I am going to leave you all. I think, Nate, I might have sent this to you, the first chapter of the book. Actually, that's going to become chapter 2. Chapter 1, so this chapter is about like what is a competency model across the history of time. It's rather short at this point. I might make it longer, I don't know, but at this point it's been concluded at that. But we can we also, the new chapter 1 is going to be why do it. I think we should start with the why, because that's the first question I would ask. Why should I pick up this book and read it, and why do it, right? So, and then, we'll have more messages on my LinkedIn profile you can go to, and or our website, aerexperts.com, and you could find out more information on that as they'll probably come out in 2025. I hope to get it all written up by the end of the year. So, and we're tracking towards that. So very excited about the book.
Yeah, I am too. That's going to be interesting. It's going to fulfill an open need there in the credentialing world.
Yeah, I hope it does. It does help us start looking at there's associations and organizations across all, especially with the trend of going to skills-based kind of apprenticeship, mentorship models as well. It's going to open up, I think, a need there. It's going to fulfill a need there and open up, I think, opportunities for people to have a way to write or to do a competency model. I think that's kind of absent. I mentor and some students at FIU and talked to them, and they said they have nothing on competency modeling. There's nothing. We talk about it all the time, but we don't have any. We don't know how to do it. So it's one of those things. And I've been talking to Professor Rodriguez there, putting together like a certificate program on how to build a competency model. So that's something also to look out for, and hopefully that'll become a realization. We're just really in talks on it. So hopefully that'll you can get a certificate in competency modeling. So.
Oh, yeah, that would be quite interesting, and there's certainly a need for that as we move into more of a competency-focused economy in terms of hiring and training.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so then my final question is, how do people get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about this or to work with AARE? You mentioned your website there. Any other info you'd like to give?
Those LinkedIn and and also the website aerexperts.com, and you can find how to get in contact with me there, or LinkedIn. So easy to reach typically. So if anybody out there wants to hear more about counseling modeling and want to consider me for other interviews or speaking opportunities, let me know. I'll be happy to do it, especially in the context of leadership as well. Competencies are actually very repetitive, as one could imagine, at the expert level around leadership, supervision, training, and research. It's just really interesting how similar those competencies are across various fields. So that's something that's been a big takeaway for me. Like, I thought it'd be a little bit more customized, but it's like 60 to 70% of all organizations tend to have that as their primary areas for expert in these type of professional roles.
Oh, that's so cool. All right, well, we're at the end of the hour here, so I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself and the listeners for all the wonderful information, both about competency modeling and the whole journey of growing and founding and growing a business. So congratulations on that, and it's wonderful to see where you are now and how much you're giving back to the industry.
Thank you, Nate. I'm a big fan, and thank you again for the opportunity. And if there's any way I can help anybody out there, let me know. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Manny.
Bye.
Bye.